She didn't ask. She explained. It was a Thursday night. I remember because I'd just grilled salmon on the back deck, and the scent still clung to my shirt when she sat across from me at the kitchen table, her wine glass in one hand, something unreadable in her eyes. Not guilt, not fear, just calm. I've been thinking, she said, and my stomach knew before my mind did. Yeah. She didn't hesitate. About us. About marriage. What it means. What it could mean if we were willing to grow. She used that voice, the one she reserved for presentations, not conversations. It wasn't casual. This was rehearsed. She crossed her legs under the table, the hem of her dress sliding up just enough to make me notice, and that pissed me off in some irrational, primal way. Because even then, I still found her attractive. You know Jess? She asked, almost too lightly. Your yoga friend? She's more than that. She's evolved. She and her husband have figured out how to breathe again in their marriage. They opened it up. Sexually. My grip tightened on the edge of the table, knuckles widening, and still she kept going. They're honest with each other. They communicate. There's trust. Real trust. No ownership, no possessiveness. Just choice. She said choice like it was this holy concept I'd never heard of. Like I hadn't been choosing her every damn day for the past 11 years. I didn't interrupt. Not because I agreed, but because I couldn't trust my voice. She swirled her wine once, twice, not drinking. It's not about cheating. It's not about what you're afraid of. It's about growth. About not dying in routine. About staying alive. Alive. That word burned. She was beautiful when she said it, the way her lips rounded it, the way her eyes softened like she was dreaming out loud. She wasn't looking for permission. She was giving me the outline. Like a manager presenting a restructuring plan. We make rules, of course. Boundaries. One non-negotiable. Family is off limits. I finally found my voice, raw and scratchy. And what exactly are you asking me? I'm not, she said, and that was the moment I knew. Knew this wasn't a conversation. This was her exit interview from the version of us I thought we still were. She stood then, her silhouette framed by the kitchen light. Even after everything she'd said, I looked at her, her curves, the faint imprint of her bra beneath that paper-thin top, the skin of her thighs peeking through the slit of her skirt, and I still wanted to touch her. Still wanted to believe that maybe this was some kind of game. A test. That if I said no, if I stood up and kissed her the right way, maybe she'd fall back into my arms like none of this had ever been said. But I didn't. I just sat there, numb. She stepped around the table and kissed my forehead, like I was some old man she'd grown fond of but no longer loved. The kind of kiss you give when you're moving on, not staying. I love you, she said. I need you to understand that. And just like that, she walked away. Up the stairs. The sound of her footsteps disappearing into the second floor we built together. I sat in silence for what must have been an hour, staring at the wine glass she'd left behind, a faint trace of her lipstick on the rim. It wasn't until I stood that I realized my salmon was still on the plate, untouched, cold, forgotten, just like the man who made it. The next morning, she acted normal. Made coffee, hummed some indie song as she padded barefoot across the hardwood floor. She looked free, radiant even, like a woman who'd just confessed a great burden and now felt lighter for it. Meanwhile, I was stuck in a new reality I hadn't agreed to. A place where rules were written by the one who wanted out, and nodding along was safer than admitting I was terrified of losing her. I said nothing, just drank my coffee and watched her move around the kitchen like nothing had happened. Because sometimes silence is easier than asking the one question you're not ready to hear the answer to. Are you already seeing someone? She didn't ask. She explained. And I nodded, because the alternative was admitting that I already felt her slipping away. I didn't realize it at the time, how much of what she said wasn't really her. Not her words. Not her clarity. Not even her calm. It was all borrowed. Days passed, and little things started to surface. The way she phrased certain ideas. Like she was quoting someone smarter, someone cooler, someone who didn't flinch when saying things like, jealousy is a sign of insecurity, or monogamy is a relic of ownership culture. Phrases that felt curated, polished, and regurgitated, like she'd practiced them in front of a mirror or in someone else's bed. At first, I chalked it up to podcasts. She'd started listening to them more lately. Self-help ones, mostly. You know the type. Hosted by smooth-talking 30-somethings with oversized headphones and underdeveloped empathy, preaching radical honesty while casually admitting to breaking up 5 marriages. I'd hear them sometimes in the background while she folded laundry or watered the plants. Calm, clinical voices talking about boundaries and transformation and how betrayal isn't real unless you agreed on the terms beforehand. But after a while, I started to suspect it wasn't just podcasts. It was someone. Jess. Of course. Her yoga friend. Her evolved friend. The one she'd conveniently name-dropped that first night. I remembered her vaguely from one of those backyard birthday parties. Long legs, tan shoulders, that kind of easy charisma people pretend they're not jealous of. Jess had shown up in a sundress without a bra and talked about tantric healing like it was as ordinary as talking about the weather. The kind of woman who could make fucking sound like an act of charity. And now I could hear Jess in my wife's voice. She said it made them stronger. My wife told me one morning while tying her robe. That opening up took the pressure off. You don't expect one person to be your everything anymore. I asked, too casually, is that what I was? Too much pressure? She didn't answer. Just sipped her coffee and stared out the window, as if the garden she never watered suddenly mattered. That's when I started noticing the repetition. Patterns. Sentences she said more than once, almost word for word. Monogamy is rooted in fear, not love. Desire doesn't disappear. Suppressing it just turns it into resentment. She said that. I asked one night. Jess. She nodded, smiling like she'd been waiting for me to catch up. She and her husband went through a really rough patch. She thought they were going to divorce. And then they tried this, and everything changed. I didn't ask how she knew all the details. Didn't ask if they'd talked about it over wine, over text, over photos maybe. I just sat there, chewing the inside of my cheek, wondering when my wife stopped talking to me and started talking about me with someone else. What I did ask, though, was this. And you think we need to try it too? Because what, you're bored? She flinched. Just slightly. But enough. It's not about being bored, she said. It's about waking up. About evolution. She made it sound like I was the one holding us back. Like I was the dinosaur. I asked her if she wanted to sleep with someone else. Directly. Just like that. She blinked, slowly. Like I'd missed the entire point. I don't want to sleep with someone else, she said. I want the freedom to. That's different. No, it really isn't. That night, lying in bed beside her, I stared at the ceiling while she slept. Her breathing was slow, steady, peaceful. I hadn't seen her sleep like that in months. And I realized something that made my stomach knot. She wasn't asking for permission to cheat. She was trying to absolve herself from the guilt of it. Like this philosophical framework, this neat little TED Talk she'd memorized, was her insurance policy. Her logic shield. If everything was about growth and freedom, then it wasn't betrayal. It was progress. I wondered if Jess had said the same things to her husband, or if she'd just planted the seed and left my wife to convince herself. I wondered how long they'd been talking about it before I was brought into the loop. How many conversations had already happened? How many nights had she already imagined it? And then I wondered something darker, something I didn't want to say out loud. Had she already done it? Not physically, maybe, but the way she spoke about the idea, the way her body loosened when she talked about freedom, it felt less like anticipation and more like relief. Like she wasn't asking to cheat. She was confessing that she already had. Maybe not with her body, but definitely with her mind. And for some reason, that hurt even worse. I remember the moment I realized she wasn't talking like herself anymore. It was a Tuesday, early fall, still warm enough to keep the windows cracked at night. I'd come home from work late, exhausted from back-to-back meetings, and there she was in the living room, cross-legged on the couch in leggings and a tight top that showed more midriff than she used to. She was on her phone, smiling in that distracted, half-absent way people smile when they're not really in the room with you. Hey, I said, setting down my keys. Long day. She barely looked up. Did you know oxytocin levels drop after the honeymoon phase, and that's why people mistake comfort for disconnection? I froze. What? She laughed, still tapping on her screen. Sorry. I was just reading something Jess sent me. It's from this book, something about the science of attachment and how we confuse routine with boredom. I didn't know how to respond. Not because I disagreed, but because I couldn't remember the last time she said anything original, something that sounded like her and not a therapist she hadn't paid. It was like watching someone rehearse a part they didn't even audition for. She spoke in terms and tone that felt off, detached, too clean, like a script built for people who needed permission to disconnect. She talked about sexual agency and emotional autonomy and transformative intimacy, like she was studying for a test on how to redefine marriage without admitting she no longer wanted to be in one. The scary part? She didn't sound conflicted. She sounded free. That night, while she was upstairs journaling, her new ritual, I sat on the edge of the bed and looked through our old photos on my phone. There was one from a trip to Big Sur 2 years ago. Her arms wrapped around me, her mouth pressed to my ear mid-laugh. I didn't even remember what the joke was, just that we were happy. Real happy. Not just playing the part. I looked at that version of her. Messy ponytail, hoodie half-zipped, no makeup. And I wanted to shake the stranger sleeping in our bed and ask where she'd buried that woman. But I didn't. Because by then I'd already learned how to be careful. Careful not to sound insecure. Careful not to sound controlling. Careful not to remind her of everything she was trying to transcend. Meanwhile, she became bolder. She stayed out later, texted more often, said things like, "I need space tonight," and "Let's try sleeping in separate beds for a while, just to reset our energy." I laughed the first time she said it, thinking it was a joke. It wasn't. The first night we slept apart, I stared at the ceiling in the guest room and listened to the distant hum of her white noise machine in our bedroom. It was the loudest silence I'd ever heard. At first, I told myself it was temporary, experimental, but deep down I knew. This wasn't a phase. It was a performance. And not hers. She was playing Jess. Playing the woman she wanted to become. The one who didn't need to explain why she craved attention from other people. The one who turned absence into empowerment. She started wearing perfume again, but not the kind I liked. She changed her Spotify playlists to names like Slow Burn and Unbound. She dyed her hair darker, more intense, more mature. She started calling herself a sensual being. And I became her ghost. I stopped asking where she was going. Stopped asking who she was texting. I started swallowing my jealousy like a bitter vitamin, something I had to learn to live with if I wanted to keep this version of her in my life. And that's when her sister noticed. It started with the little things. Her asking if we were okay. The way she looked at me during family dinners, a little longer than normal, like she was watching something unravel. One evening, we were all at a birthday party for their nephew. Her sister and I were alone in the kitchen, grabbing plates. She glanced over and said, "You don't laugh like you used to." I shrugged. "Guess I'm just tired." "No," she said quietly. "That's not it." She didn't press. She didn't need to. Her words followed me like a shadow for days after. Because she was right. I was tired, but not in the way I'd admitted. I was tired of pretending I didn't notice that my wife had become someone else's echo. Tired of waiting for a stranger to become my partner again. And most of all, I was tired of trying not to say what I really felt, that this new version of her wasn't evolving. She was escaping the life we built, the comfort we nurtured, the man who still remembered what it felt like to be enough. We didn't fall into it recklessly. That's the part people don't understand. They think opening your marriage is just a slow-motion car crash, a burst of chaos and sex and inevitable destruction. But that's not how it started. We were careful. We talked. We read articles. We even made lists, actual rules typed into a shared note on our phones, like we were planning a road trip instead of giving each other permission to sleep with other people. Rule 1, no one we work with. Rule 2, no friends. Rule 3, family is completely off limits. Rule 4, always be honest, even when it's uncomfortable. Rule 5, we come first. Those were the guardrails. Our flimsy little fence around a forest fire. We picked a weekend. That's how structured it was. Friday to Sunday, check in on Sunday night, debrief on Monday. Like it was a business retreat. Like we could schedule desire into a clean little box and contain the chaos. That first weekend, she went out. I stayed in. Not because I didn't have options. I could have pulled up an app, chased down some dopamine. But the truth was, I didn't want new. I wanted us. I wanted to believe that this was just a test. One we'd pass and look back on years later with a smile and say, "Remember when we tried that insane idea?" Instead, I spent the night on the back patio with a bottle of wine and no one to talk to. She came home late, smiling. Not giddy, not reckless, just light. Her skin had that glow I used to think only I could give her. Her hair was slightly messy, her earrings still on. She kissed me, lightly, casually, like it meant nothing. Like we were roommates with benefits. "How was your night?" I asked. "Good," she said. "He was nice." That was all. She didn't say more. I didn't ask. Because if I asked, I'd hear the answer in her eyes, in her body, in the way she walked like something had been unlocked and the key hadn't come from me. The next morning, she made coffee like normal. She wore one of my t-shirts. She even sat beside me on the couch and rested her head against my shoulder. And still, I felt further from her than I ever had. We kept going. Schedules. Boundaries. Weekend rotations. At first, I thought I could handle it. I told myself this was just discomfort, the price of progress. But what openness really felt like wasn't freedom. It was waiting. Waiting for my turn in a life that used to be mine. She started using words like energy and alignment. She said the other men, not many, but enough, helped her feel alive in her body. She said she'd never realized how much of her sexual identity had been filtered through me. That she was learning what she liked, what she really liked. I nodded and smiled and swallowed the weight in my throat because I didn't know how to say what I was really thinking, that I missed being enough. Missed her choosing me without needing the contrast of someone else's hands. I tried. God, I tried. I even went on a couple dates. There was one woman, Alicia, who was soft-spoken and kind, and she touched my wrist in a way that made my pulse jump. But even in her presence, all I could think about was my wife. I kept comparing, kept waiting for a flicker of what I used to feel. But it never came, because openness didn't make me feel free. It made me feel replaceable. I started staying quiet around her. Less jokes, less vulnerability. Every time I opened up, she nodded like a therapist, present but detached. She'd ask, "Do you feel insecure about this?" As if insecurity was something I should be ashamed of. As if feeling hurt by the idea of sharing the woman I loved made me outdated. Old-fashioned. Weak. Meanwhile, she bloomed. She danced around the kitchen again. She wore new lingerie, not for me, but for her mirror. She started humming again when she got ready for nights out. She texted more often, laughed at things I didn't say. I wanted to scream. But instead, I folded the laundry and made sure the fridge was stocked with almond milk and wine, just how she liked it. I was afraid to say what I was really feeling because I already knew the response. I'd heard it in her voice, in Jess's voice, in every quote she repeated from books with titles like The Ethical Slut and Mating in Captivity. Love is an ownership. Jealousy is a teacher, not a truth. Monogamy isn't synonymous with commitment. All of it sounded smart, evolved, compassionate, even. But none of it addressed the simplest, most human part of me. The part that used to see her look at me and light up. The part that now felt like an afterthought in my own marriage. Openness didn't feel open. It felt like being tolerated. Like I was the designated driver in a relationship high on liberation. And every night I sat on the couch, waiting for her to come home, I told myself the same lie. This is what love looks like when you're evolved. It happened on a Sunday afternoon, the kind that feels suspended between obligation and quiet. The house was too clean. She'd gone out early, said she needed movement and air, and left me with the echo of her perfume still lingering in the hallway. Her sister came by unannounced. That alone was unusual. She stood in the doorway holding a paper bag from the bakery down the street, hair pulled back, expression cautious but warm. She hugged me longer than normal, and I noticed how stiff I felt in her arms, like I'd forgotten how to be held without bracing for impact. "I brought pastries," she said, lifting the bag like a peace offering. "Dangerous," I replied automatically. The joke landed flat. We sat at the kitchen table, sunlight slanting across the wood like it was trying to show us something we were pretending not to see. She poured coffee without asking, already knowing how I took it. That familiarity, that small act of being known, made something tight in my chest twist harder. We talked about nothing at first. Her work, traffic, a movie she'd watched, the weather doing that weird seasonal stutter where it couldn't decide what it wanted to be. She watched me the whole time. Not obviously, just enough. Finally, she stopped stirring her coffee and looked straight at me. "Are you okay?" It was such a simple question. No philosophy, no reframing, no talk about growth or boundaries or insecurity. Just 4 words, soft, direct, human. I opened my mouth to lie. "I'm fine," hovered right there, practiced and ready. But something about the way she asked, like she was genuinely prepared for the answer, made my throat close instead. I stared at the steam rising from my mug, counted 3 breaths, then said quietly, "I don't know." Her face didn't change. No shock, no pity, just attention. That's fair, she said. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It felt earned. I feel like I'm disappearing, I admitted, the words surprising me as much as they probably surprised her. Like I'm still here, doing the same things, but somehow I don't register anymore. She nodded once, slow. I've noticed you're quieter. I laughed under my breath. That obvious? Only if someone's paying attention. That landed harder than it should have. I told her more than I meant to. Not details, never details, but the shape of it. The waiting. The way openness felt less like freedom and more like standing in line for affection. The way I'd started measuring my worth and how relieved my wife seemed when I didn't ask questions. I didn't say her name. I didn't need to. Her sister didn't interrupt. Didn't defend. Didn't minimize. She just listened, chin resting in her hand, eyes steady, grounded. It was intoxicating in a quiet way. Being heard without being fixed. Being seen without being analyzed. At one point, she reached across the table and rested her fingers near mine. Not touching, just close enough that I felt the warmth. You know, she said carefully, you're allowed to feel hurt by this. I swallowed. Apparently not. According to the books. She snorted before she could stop herself, then covered her mouth. Yeah, well, books don't live in your house. The moment stretched. I became acutely aware of her proximity. The faint citrus scent of her lotion. The way her knee brushed mine when she shifted in her chair. It wasn't sexual, not exactly, but it was intimate in that dangerous way honesty can be. I leaned back slightly, creating space I wasn't sure I wanted. I don't want to make things complicated, I said. Her expression softened. You didn't. Things already are. She stood a few minutes later, slipping her coat back on, the air between us charged in a way neither of us named. At the door, she hesitated, hand on the knob. If you ever need to talk, she said, really talk, I'm here. I know, I replied. After she left, the house felt different. Not emptier, just awake. That night, when my wife came home flushed and smiling, telling me about a conversation she'd had with someone really insightful, I listened. I nodded. I played my role. But inside, something had shifted. Because for the first time in months, someone had asked how I was. Not as a variable in her growth, not as a test of my evolution, but as a man standing in the middle of something he didn't recognize anymore. And that question stayed with me long after everyone had gone to sleep. Are you okay? I didn't have the answer yet. But for the first time, I felt like maybe someone actually cared whether I found it. I wasn't supposed to hear it. She thought I was in the garage, tinkering with the lawnmower, and technically, I had been. I'd gone out there to find something to do with my hands. Idle hands were dangerous lately. If I wasn't moving, I was thinking. And if I was thinking, I was bleeding in places no one could see. The phone rang inside the house. The windows were open. I wasn't trying to listen, but her voice carried, a little too sharp to ignore. No, I haven't told him. Not all of it. Silence. Then her sister's voice. Softer, but clear enough to cut through the late afternoon stillness. You're playing with fire. I stopped breathing. There was a pause. A sound like my wife pacing the kitchen, barefoot on tile. Her tone was defensive when she spoke again. You don't understand. We made rules. It's not cheating if we agreed. Another pause. Then her sister, firmer this time. Rules don't protect feelings. That hit like a gut punch. Not just because of the truth of it, but because it was coming from the one person who dared ask me how I was. The only one who saw that this wasn't some noble experiment in trust. It was abandonment, disguised as enlightenment. She's not like the others, my wife added quickly. She gets it. And she's happy. Her husband is happy too. Her sister didn't respond right away. I leaned against the wall of the garage, pulse thudding like I'd just caught her in bed with someone. Only this was worse in a way. Because this wasn't lust. This was ideology. Faith. My wife didn't think she was betraying me. She thought she was saving herself. Her sister tried again, quieter now. You can't theory your way out of hurting someone. It doesn't matter what books you read or how many podcasts you quote. If it's breaking him, it's breaking the marriage. Even if you call it something else. I heard the clink of glass. Maybe her setting down a mug too hard. He agreed to this, my wife said, her voice rising. He said yes. I didn't force him. But you did, I thought. Not with threats. With hope. With the quiet pressure of your discontent. You didn't give me a choice. You gave me a fork in the road. And both paths led away from the version of us I wanted to keep. I think he's lying to you, her sister said finally. There was a long silence. No footsteps. No reply. I've seen him, she added, softer now. He's not okay. He doesn't say it out loud, but he's fading. He barely talks anymore. That's not growth. That's grief. A chair scraped. My wife must have stood up, because when she spoke again, her voice came from further away, maybe pacing again. He's just adjusting. We both are. It's new. No, her sister said. You're new. He's surviving. That silence afterward was heavier than anything else. They moved on after that, to safer topics, smaller words. I stepped away before I could hear more. I didn't want to keep spying on something that had already exposed me. Back inside, I stood at the sink pretending to wash my hands as she walked into the kitchen, phone tucked in her back pocket like nothing had happened. She kissed my cheek. Hey, she said lightly. I was just talking to my sister. She might stop by later. I nodded. Cool. Cool. What a stupid, small word to wrap around something so tectonic. That night, I lay beside her in bed while she scrolled on her phone, her back to me, and I kept replaying her words. He agreed. She believed that was enough. That my compliance meant consent. That saying yes, with my mouth, made the ache in my chest invalid. I turned off the light and stared into the dark, and the only thing I could hear was her sister's voice. Rules don't protect feelings. The longer I sat with it, the more it settled like a truth I should have seen all along. My wife wasn't breaking the rules. She was breaking me. And she didn't even notice, because theory doesn't have a heart to break. It just keeps repeating itself until the people who live inside it forget what real love sounds like. But someone still heard me. Someone still saw it. And that, somehow, made me feel both worse and slightly less alone. It didn't start with touching. That's the lie I told myself. It didn't start with flirting either. At least, not in the usual sense. There were no lingering stares. No accidental brushes of skin. No midnight texts filled with hidden meaning. It started with words. Just words. Late conversations in the kitchen. Short messages that stretched longer than they should have. Moments where her sister, her, of all people, became the first person I wanted to talk to after my wife walked out the door. We didn't plan it. That's the second lie. It just happened in inches. A kind of gravity pulling us closer with each shared silence. I'd find myself waiting in the kitchen just a little longer if I knew she might drop by. I noticed the way her eyes lingered when she asked how I was doing. Not politely, but intently. Like the answer actually mattered. She never gave advice. Never told me what I should feel. She just listened. Really listened. And I started craving it. That stillness, that presence. That sense that, for those few moments, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't evolving. I wasn't adjusting to a marriage that now felt more like a polite agreement between two co-workers with joint assets. I was just me, and she was just there. Fully. Quietly. We'd sit across from each other, coffee between us, and the air would go still. Not tense, not yet, but charged. Like something waiting to be said, or not said, was sitting at the edge of both our lips. She always left before it got too late. That's how I justified it. Nothing's happening, I told myself. Nothing physical. No lines have been crossed. But every night, I'd lie in bed beside my wife, who was either texting someone else or curled away from me like a continent drifting, and I'd think about those conversations instead. About her sister's voice. Her calmness. Her ability to sit with my mess without trying to clean it up. And then I realized something I didn't want to admit. She was my first thought in the morning. She was the last one before I fell asleep. She was the only one who felt like home in a house I no longer recognized. Still, I hadn't touched her. Not once. That had to count for something, right? Then came the evening that cracked it open. She stopped by to drop off a book my wife had left at her place. My wife wasn't home. Out with someone, I didn't ask who. I told her she could come in for a minute. Just one. The sun was setting behind her, catching the light in her hair, casting gold across her shoulders. We ended up sitting on the back porch. No coffee this time. Just wine. She poured it like she'd done it 100 times, and maybe she had. Maybe in another life where this didn't feel like betrayal, just waiting for a name. We didn't talk much, and that made it worse. Silence between us had changed. It used to be comfort. Now it was loaded. She looked out across the yard and said, "I hate what this is doing to you." I didn't answer. Couldn't. Then she turned, slowly, eyes meeting mine. Something in her expression tightened. Not desire, exactly. Something heavier. Something like restraint wearing thin. "I don't think she sees it," she added. "How far you've already gone." I opened my mouth. Closed it. because I knew what she meant. I hadn't touched her, but I'd started thinking about what it would feel like. Her hand in mine, her breath against my neck, her body, warm and real, in a space that wasn't defined by loss. I'd started imagining what her kiss would taste like, not out of lust, but because it felt like the only place I might still be chosen. And once that thought took root, it didn't matter that we never acted on it. Something had already shifted. When she stood to leave, we lingered at the door a second too long. Her fingers brushed mine as she handed me the empty glass. I didn't flinch. Neither did she. "I'll see you soon," she said, voice barely above a whisper. And I knew I would. I closed the door and leaned against it, heart hammering like I'd done something wrong, and maybe I had. Maybe not with my hands. But thoughts are louder than touch when they echo in a hollow marriage. And I'd already broken something. Something more sacred than skin. It was raining that night. Not the cinematic kind. Not thunder or lightning or stormy drama. Just a quiet, steady rain that darkened the windows and made the world feel a little softer, a little quieter, the kind of rain that erases footprints. She showed up without warning. Said she had been in the area, which we both knew wasn't true. Her sister never came to this side of town without a reason. But I didn't question it. I opened the door and let her in, and that choice, that tiny, silent nod, was the real start of it. She shook the water from her coat. Her hair clung to her face in damp strands, her cheeks pink from the cold. She looked unguarded. And when she smiled, it wasn't polite. It wasn't performative. It was tired, vulnerable. "I just didn't want to go home yet," she said, like she owed me an explanation. "You don't have to," I replied too quickly. She hesitated in the doorway, not crossing the invisible threshold between guest and something else. So I stepped back first, gave her space to follow, and she did. Quietly, slowly, like she knew what this was and didn't need to ask. We sat on the couch. No wine this time. No coffee. Just the rain pattering against the windows and our breath trying not to sink in the silence. For a while, we didn't speak. And then she did. "I keep thinking about how we got here," she said, voice low. "Not just you and her. You and me." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Because I'd been doing the same thing, trying to rewind it, to find the first crack. The first lingering gaze. The first moment where caring turned into curiosity, and curiosity became the one thing I wasn't allowed to admit. I wanted her. Not in a shallow way. Not in a get-even kind of way. I wanted her because she made me feel real again. And now she was sitting on my couch in the dark, her knees drawn up under her, sweater sleeves pulled over her hands, and the look in her eyes wasn't confused anymore. It wasn't cautious. It was honest. That's what did it. The honesty. Because in that moment, I realized we'd already crossed the line. Not with bodies, but with presence. She was where my mind went when I couldn't breathe. She was where I stored the pieces of myself that my wife no longer asked about. And she knew. We both knew. There was no seduction. No dramatic kiss. No push or pull. Just stillness. A pause where no one moved, and yet everything shifted. I reached for her hand. She let me. No flinch. No gasp. Just fingers interlacing in a way that felt like memory. When we finally looked at each other, we didn't speak. We didn't explain. Because explanations are what you give when you're unsure. We weren't unsure. The kiss was soft. Barely there. Like a question answered in a language we'd both been fluent in, but too scared to use. It didn't lead to sex. Not that night. Because it wasn't about that. It was about something far more dangerous, intimacy. That raw, unfiltered moment where you show someone the part of you that aches, and they reach for it instead of turning away. We sat there like that for a long time, just breathing together. Her head eventually resting on my shoulder, my hand still holding hers, our bodies aligned in a way that didn't feel stolen. It felt surrendered. When she finally stood to leave, we didn't make promises. She didn't ask what this meant. I didn't try to label it. She just looked at me like she'd seen something she wasn't supposed to see, but was grateful she did. And I watched her walk out into the rain. No umbrella, no rush, just calm. The door clicked shut behind her, and I stood there in the quiet. Every rule we'd written months ago now ash at my feet. Because this wasn't revenge. It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't even an affair, not in the way people define it. It was a moment where I stopped pretending intimacy only meant sex, and where she stopped pretending that caring deeply wasn't already a form of crossing. We didn't justify it. We didn't rush it. But it happened. And that rule, Family is off limits. Didn't break with a scream or a scandal. It broke quietly, with a kiss that felt more like a truth than anything my wife had said in months. She noticed the difference before she understood it. It was subtle at first. I wasn't cold exactly, just still. Calmer. I didn't flinch when she came home late. Didn't ask who she was texting. I stopped scanning her face for traces of someone else's touch. I didn't reach for her in bed. I didn't recoil when she didn't reach for me. And that confused her. She thought I was giving up. That's what she told herself. That I was adjusting well. That maybe, finally, I had evolved into the version of a man who didn't need reassurance, didn't feel threatened, didn't confuse love with exclusivity. She thought the open marriage was working. She mistook my distance for growth. The truth was much simpler, much messier. I had already stepped out. Not with my body. Not yet. But emotionally, spiritually, I wasn't hers anymore. That tether between us, once thick with devotion and history, had thinned to something invisible. Something I could no longer feel unless I squinted and pretended. And now someone else occupied that space. Her sister never pushed it. After that night, we didn't talk about the kiss. We didn't plan the next one. We didn't need to. What we had wasn't built on schedules or agreements. It was a quiet gravity that pulled us back together every time we drifted too far apart. And I think my wife sensed it, even if she didn't know the shape of it yet. She started asking strange questions at odd times. Do I seem different to you lately? Have you felt closer to yourself these past few weeks? I'd answer with a shrug or a small smile. Nothing loaded, just enough to keep things peaceful. And it only made her more convinced she was winning. You're calmer, she said one night, folding laundry beside me. You're not clinging like before. It's sexy, honestly. Confident. I didn't respond. I just handed her a towel. She kissed my cheek a few seconds later, soft, almost grateful, and I let her. Because the truth would hurt more than silence. And because the worst betrayals don't come with fireworks. They come with the slow realization that you've been replaced not out of spite, but by someone who never needed permission to see you clearly. I stopped waiting for her to choose me. And somehow, in letting go, I became more myself than I'd been in months. She started leaning in again, wanting more time together, suggesting we go out, just the two of us. She'd touch my arm at dinner, tell stories she used to only share with her friends. Her eyes would linger, and part of me wondered if she was trying to pull me back, or if she just wanted proof that she hadn't lost me. Either way, it was too late, because the man sitting across from her wasn't hers anymore. Not really. He belonged to quiet mornings with someone else, to long talks that didn't require translation, to glances that said, I see you, not I need you to validate this version of me. The sister never asked for anything, never tried to insert herself into my life. She just showed up when it mattered, not physically, but emotionally. A presence, not a possession. And the more I felt that kind of care, the more obvious it became what I'd been starving for all along. Connection without condition. Presence without philosophy. She, my wife, could sense it in how I looked at her. Or rather, how I didn't. My gaze didn't search anymore. Didn't plead. I think that was the part that shook her most. Because once someone stops hoping you'll come back, you realize they've already left. One night she said it, almost as a joke. You're not jealous anymore. Did you finally unlock the secret? I smiled. Maybe. But the truth is, it wasn't a secret. It was just someone else. Someone who didn't need an open marriage to love me gently. Someone who didn't build rules to protect feelings she no longer had. Someone who simply cared. And when you've tasted that kind of intimacy, that quiet, grounding affection that doesn't ask you to compete or evolve, you stop chasing the version of love that keeps you running in circles. She noticed the change before she knew its source. And by the time she finally asked the question that mattered, she wouldn't like the answer. Because detachment, once chosen, isn't easy to undo. Especially when you've already been seen, fully, completely, by someone who never needed rules to do it. She asked on a Wednesday night, after dinner, after wine, after the quiet had stretched so long it started to feel intentional. We were sitting across from each other at the table, plates cleared, candles still burning because she liked the atmosphere. She was wearing that soft sweater she usually saved for dates. Not for me, I realized, but for the version of herself she liked to present. Grounded. Desirable. In control. She watched me the way people do when they already know something is wrong, but need confirmation anyway. Can I ask you something? She said. I nodded. I'd been nodding for months. Her fingers traced the stem of her glass. Not nervous. Careful. Is there someone else? There it was. Not anger. Not accusation. Just disbelief wrapped in curiosity, like the question itself offended her sense of order. I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew the truth would land harder than any lie. And for the first time in a long while, I wasn't interested in protecting her from consequences. She tilted her head. I mean, emotionally. Obviously, we're open. But you feel gone. And I don't understand why. I looked at her. Really looked at her. This woman I'd built a life with. This woman who had learned how to speak about love like a concept instead of a choice. Anyone but her, she added suddenly, eyes narrowing just a fraction. Please tell me it's not her. The air changed. That was the moment I understood everything. Not that she suspected her sister. She hadn't, not consciously. But the fear surfaced before the logic could stop it. Instinct always knows where the fault line runs. You said family was off limits, she continued, her voice tightening. That was the one rule. The only one that mattered. I exhaled slowly. You're not asking because you want the truth, I said. You're asking because you want reassurance. Her jaw clenched. Answer the question. So I did. Yes. The word didn't echo. It didn't explode. It just sat there between us, solid and undeniable. Her face drained of color, then flushed hot. She stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. No, she said. No, that's not. You wouldn't. You knew that was the line. I knew, I said quietly. That's why it mattered. She paced, ran a hand through her hair, laughed once, sharp and humorless. This is different, she said. This is betrayal. I almost smiled. Is it? I asked. Or is it just the first time the rules didn't protect you? She stopped moving. That's not fair, she snapped. We agreed. You agreed. I gave you honesty. Freedom. You gave me permission to disappear, I said. There's a difference. Her eyes burned. So what? You fell in love with her to punish me. No, I said. I fell in love with her because she saw me when you stopped looking. That landed. She sat back down slowly, like her legs no longer trusted her. You could have chosen anyone, she whispered. Anyone else. I didn't choose, I said. I responded. Silence swallowed the room. She stared at the table, then back at me, something brittle in her gaze. You broke the one rule, she said. No, I replied. I followed it better than you did. Her head snapped up. What does that even mean? It means, I said evenly. You wanted rules so you wouldn't feel guilty about leaving emotionally. I broke one because I stayed present. Because I didn't outsource my heart. Because when someone asked if I was okay, I didn't recite theory, I answered honestly. Tears welled, but didn't fall. She hated crying. Hated losing composure. You were supposed to trust me, she said. I did, I answered. Until trust became something you managed instead of lived. She shook her head, stunned. I never meant to hurt you. I know, I said. That's the problem. The candles flickered. Wax dripped onto the table, unnoticed. You're not sorry because you lost me, I continued. You're sorry because you didn't think you could. She looked at me like she was seeing a stranger. Maybe she was. Is it over? She asked. I didn't answer immediately. Because the truth was, it had been over long before this conversation. Long before the kiss. Long before the rule broke. It ended, I said finally, when love became something we negotiated instead of chose. She didn't argue. She didn't scream. She just sat there, absorbing the realization she never wanted to face. That the rule wasn't sacred. It was convenient. And for the first time, it hadn't worked. The marriage didn't end that night. There was no dramatic exit. No suitcase packed in silence. No screaming, no slamming of doors. We slept in the same house. Ate at the same table. Even exchanged polite words like, hey, and can you pass the salt? But something was gone. Something so subtle it had been slipping for months, maybe years, but now it was undeniable. The cord between us had frayed so much that when it finally snapped, there was no recoil. Just release. We didn't talk about what came next. She didn't ask me to leave. I didn't suggest she should. Instead, we lived in the echo of a life we no longer shared. Two people coexisting in the same space, each pretending we hadn't already made our choices. I think she hoped things would settle. That the admission would burn fast, like dry paper, intense, then gone. That we'd circle back eventually. That I'd wake up one morning, forget her sister's name, and crawl back into the script we'd been trying to revise for far too long. But there are some things you can't unknow. Once you've been truly seen, seen without filter or theory or conditional acceptance, you can't go back to being invisible. She spent more time in the garden after that, replanted everything, dug her hands into soil like it owed her something. I watched from the kitchen sometimes, wondering if she'd ever admit that the openness she chased so fiercely had cost her the very thing she was trying to keep. Not me, but us. Presence had been replaced by permission, affection by scheduling, intimacy by intellectualization. She called it love, but it wasn't love anymore. It was a set of protocols, a shared spreadsheet of emotional expectations and physical allowances. Something that looked beautiful from the outside, but required a user manual to survive. Her sister never came by again, not for a while. We kept our distance. We needed to. The honesty between us had scorched too much too fast, and neither of us wanted to pretend it was casual. What we shared wasn't about rebellion or revenge. It was recognition. She hadn't planned to fall for me any more than I had for her. But in a world that had become so clinical, so calculated, she offered something rare. Presence. No angles. No agenda. No map. Just herself. The kind of closeness that made everything else feel performative. Eventually, my wife and I had the talk. The real one. It happened in the living room, late on a Tuesday. No wine this time. No rain. Just quiet. She sat across from me, hands in her lap. There was no fight left in her. "I think we're done," she said softly. I nodded. "I know." She looked around the room like she was taking inventory of a place she used to live in but didn't recognize anymore. "I thought if we gave each other freedom, we'd grow closer." "You wanted to stop feeling guilty," I replied. "You thought redefining love would protect it." She didn't deny it. We talked logistics after that. The house. The car. Who would stay where? Who would take what? It was almost professional. Clean. Two people dividing a business they once called a marriage. But when she stood to leave the room, she paused at the doorway. "Do you love her?" It wasn't bitter. Just real. I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "She never needed rules to care." She nodded once. That was the last real thing we said. Weeks passed. Papers were signed. Boxes packed. Photos taken down. The house began to empty, but not in the way that hurt. More like a room finally exhaling after being held too tightly for too long. And me? I didn't run to her sister. There was no rush. No need. What we had wasn't built on urgency. It was built on truth, and truth doesn't need to sprint. When we did see each other again, weeks later, on neutral ground, it was quiet. A coffee shop. She looked the same, but more grounded, as if letting things burn had finally cleared space for her own stillness. We didn't say much. We didn't need to. There was nothing to justify anymore. We had already been chosen, long before anyone noticed.